Imagine settling in for the night, perhaps with something warm to drink, ready to let your mind wander through the marble corridors and blood-soaked amphitheatres of history's most extraordinary civilization. Tonight, we're embarking on a journey through 2 millennia of Roman power, intrigue, and human ambition so vast it shaped the very foundations of our modern world. This is the perfect video to help you unwind, forget the pressures of today, and lose yourself in stories of emperors who thought themselves gods, gladiators who became legends, and ordinary citizens who lived through the rise and fall of an empire that believed it would last forever. What you're about to discover isn't the sanitized version of Roman history you might remember from school textbooks. This is the raw, unfiltered story of a civilization that built aqueducts that still function today, while simultaneously perfecting the art of public execution as entertainment. A society that gave us legal systems we still use while normalizing practices that would horrify modern sensibilities. A culture that produced philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and monsters like Caligula, sometimes within the same generation. The Romans didn't just conquer the known world, they transformed it, rebuilt it, and left their mark so deeply that we're still living in their shadow 2,000 years later. From the hills of Rome to the edges of Scotland, from the deserts of North Africa to the forests of Germany, Roman influence touched every aspect of human civilization in ways both brilliant and terrible. Let's begin with a story that perfectly encapsulates the Roman genius for turning brutality into spectacle, engineering into art, and death into entertainment, all while maintaining the pretense that they were the most civilized people who had ever lived. In the year 80 CE, Emperor Titus opened the Colosseum with games that lasted 100 days. What happened during those 100 days wasn't just entertainment. It was a carefully orchestrated demonstration of Roman power that combined technological marvel with psychological warfare on a scale the world had never seen. The Colosseum itself was an engineering miracle that modern architects still struggle to fully understand. Beneath the arena floor lay a labyrinth of chambers, corridors, and mechanical systems that could flood the entire structure with water for naval battles, then drain it completely within hours for gladiatorial combat. Elevators powered by counterweights and pulleys could lift wild animals, scenery, and performers from the underground chambers directly onto the arena floor, creating effects that seemed magical to audiences who had no frame of reference for such sophisticated machinery. But the true genius of the Colosseum wasn't its engineering, it was its psychology. The building could hold 50,000 spectators, roughly 10% of Rome's entire population, and every aspect of its design was calculated to create specific emotional and social effects. The seating arrangement reinforced Roman social hierarchy with mathematical precision. Senators sat closest to the action, ordinary citizens filled the middle sections, and slaves watched from the highest galleries. Everyone knew their place, and the architecture made that place visible to everyone else. The opening games featured spectacles designed to demonstrate Rome's dominion over the natural world, human civilization, and death itself. Exotic animals from across the empire, lions from Africa, bears from the northern forests, elephants from the eastern provinces, were brought to Rome not just to be killed, but to be killed in ways that showcased Roman technological superiority and administrative efficiency. On the first day alone, over 5,000 animals died in the arena. This wasn't random slaughter, it was systematic demonstration of Roman power over the natural world. Professional hunters called venatores fought elaborate choreographed battles against carefully selected combinations of beasts. The underground chambers could release dozens of different animals in sequence, creating constantly changing scenarios that kept the audience engaged while reinforcing the message that Roman ingenuity could control and manipulate nature itself. But the animal hunts were merely the opening act. The main attraction was human combat, and the Romans had developed this into an art form that combined athletic competition, theatrical performance, and public execution in ways that created new categories of entertainment. Gladiatorial combat wasn't simply about watching men fight to the death. It was about witnessing the transformation of ordinary human beings into living embodiments of Roman values through violence. The gladiators themselves came from every corner of the empire and every level of society. Condemned criminals fought alongside volunteers who had sold themselves into combat for money or glory. Prisoners of war shared the arena with free men who had chosen the gladiatorial life as a path to fame and fortune. Former slaves competed against aristocrats who had fallen from grace, and citizens who had embraced the warrior lifestyle as a form of religious devotion. Each category of gladiator was armed and trained differently, creating matchups that tested different combinations of strength, speed, skill, and courage. The retiarius fought with net and trident, relying on agility and range. The Murmillo carried sword and shield in the traditional legionary style. The Thrax used curved daggers and small shields that emphasized speed and precision. These weren't random weapons assignments. They were carefully designed to create dramatic contrasts that would engage the audience while testing different aspects of combat effectiveness. The psychological dimension of gladiatorial combat was as sophisticated as its physical aspects. Gladiators were trained not just to fight, but to die well. A warrior who faced death with courage and dignity earned the respect of the crowd, and sometimes even earned freedom. A fighter who begged for mercy or showed cowardice faced not only death but posthumous disgrace that extended to his family and descendants. This emphasis on honourable death wasn't mere Roman cruelty. It was a fundamental expression of Roman values that extended throughout their civilization. Romans believed that how a person faced death revealed their true character and determined their legacy. The arena provided a public stage for this ultimate test, allowing ordinary citizens to witness and judge the moral fibre of both participants and themselves. The crowd's role in gladiatorial games was as important as the fighters themselves. The audience didn't just watch. They participated in life and death decisions through collective voice voting that could save or condemn wounded gladiators. This wasn't mob rule, it was democracy applied to matters of ultimate consequence, giving ordinary Roman citizens direct power over life and death in ways that reinforced their sense of participation in imperial power. The famous thumbs up or thumbs down gesture that supposedly determined gladiator fates is largely mythical. The actual crowd signals were more complex and varied by region and context. But the underlying principle was real. The Roman people collectively held the power to grant or deny mercy, and this power was understood as both a privilege and a responsibility that defined Roman citizenship. During Titus's 100-day celebration, the gladiatorial games reached levels of spectacle and complexity that were never again matched in Roman history. Entire armies of gladiators fought massive battles that recreated famous military victories, complete with historically accurate costumes, weapons, and tactics. Naval battles flooded the arena with enough water to float actual warships, manned by crews who fought to the death, while the audience watched from dry seats just yards away. The logistics of these spectacular games required organisational capabilities that rivaled military campaigns. Thousands of animals had to be captured, transported and maintained in perfect condition until their moment of death. Hundreds of gladiators required training, equipment, medical care and psychological preparation. The mechanical systems that created the special effects needed constant maintenance and operation by skilled technicians who worked with the precision of a modern theatrical production. But perhaps most remarkably, the entire spectacle was provided free to the Roman people as a gift from their emperor. Titus spent enormous sums of imperial wealth to demonstrate his generosity and power, establishing expectations that future emperors would struggle to match. The games weren't just entertainment, they were political statements, economic policy, and social control mechanisms wrapped in the package of spectacular violence. The psychological impact of the Colosseum's opening games extended far beyond their entertainment value. Citizens who witnessed these spectacles understood that they lived in a civilization capable of mobilizing unlimited resources for the pleasure of its people. The engineering marvels they saw demonstrated Roman technological superiority. The variety of gladiators and animals proved Roman dominion over the known world. The generosity of the emperor reinforced the benefits of imperial rule. But most importantly, the games provided a collective experience that unified Roman citizens across social classes in shared appreciation for spectacle, shared participation in life and death decisions, and shared identity as members of a civilization that was fundamentally different from and superior to all others. The Colosseum wasn't just a building, it was a machine for creating Roman identity and reinforcing Roman values through the medium of carefully orchestrated violence. The success of Titus's games established the Colosseum as the centre of Roman public life for the next 4 centuries. Subsequent emperors competed to present increasingly elaborate spectacles, leading to innovations in stage machinery, animal procurement, gladiator training, and crowd management that pushed the boundaries of what was technically and financially possible. The influence of gladiatorial culture extended throughout Roman society in ways that shaped everything from military training to legal procedures to religious practices. The virtues celebrated in the arena, courage, honour, dignity and death, loyalty to comrades, became idealized Roman characteristics that influenced behaviour far beyond the context of violent entertainment. Roman military training incorporated gladiatorial techniques and emphasized the same psychological preparation for honourable death that arena fighters received. Legal proceedings often included elements of theatrical spectacle that drew on arena traditions. Religious ceremonies adapted gladiatorial imagery and language to describe the relationship between mortals and gods. The gladiatorial games also created one of history's first celebrity cultures, with successful fighters achieving fame and wealth that transcended their humble origins. Star gladiators received endorsement deals, had their images reproduced on household goods, and attracted devoted fans who followed their careers with the intensity of modern sports enthusiasts. Some gladiators became so popular that emperors hesitated to risk their lives in combat, leading to carefully managed careers that balanced genuine danger with calculated preservation of valuable entertainment assets. The most successful fighters could earn enough money to purchase their freedom and retire to comfortable lives as trainers, entrepreneurs, or even politicians. But the arena's influence on Roman society wasn't limited to positive reinforcement of desired values. The constant exposure to spectacular violence had psychological effects that shaped Roman attitudes toward cruelty, death, and human suffering in ways that contemporary observers found disturbing even by ancient standards. Roman writers like Seneca criticized the games for their brutalizing effect on audiences, arguing that constant exposure to violence for entertainment corrupted the moral sensibilities of citizens and made them more accepting of cruelty in other contexts. These critics pointed to the enthusiasm with which crowds demanded death for wounded gladiators, and the casual indifference with which citizens watched public executions that were integrated into arena entertainment. The psychological impact of arena culture extended beyond individual moral corruption to influence broader Roman attitudes toward conquest, slavery, and imperial administration. Citizens who had been conditioned to view violent domination as entertainment were more likely to support aggressive military policies and harsh treatment of subject peoples. The arena's normalization of violence also influenced Roman legal practices, which incorporated public spectacle and physical punishment in ways that served both deterrent and entertainment functions. Public executions were carefully choreographed events that combined legal procedure with theatrical performance, creating memorable experiences that reinforced social order while satisfying public appetite for dramatic spectacle. The technological innovations developed for arena entertainment had applications far beyond gladiatorial games. The engineering techniques used to create the Colosseum's mechanical systems influenced Roman architecture, military engineering, and urban infrastructure throughout the empire. The logistical capabilities developed to supply arena spectacles were adapted for military campaigns and administrative operations. The Colosseum's influence on Roman architecture was particularly significant, establishing design principles and construction techniques that were applied to theatres, amphitheatres, and public buildings throughout the empire. Roman engineers developed new methods for supporting large spans, managing crowd flow, and integrating mechanical systems that became standard features of imperial architecture. But the deeper impact of the Colosseum was cultural rather than technical. The building and its games established the template for Roman public life that emphasized spectacle, hierarchy, and collective participation in imperial power. This template influenced urban planning throughout the empire, as conquered cities were rebuilt according to Roman principles that prioritized public spaces designed for mass gatherings and spectacular entertainment. The psychological and social innovations pioneered in the Colosseum became tools of imperial administration that helped Rome maintain control over diverse populations spanning 3 continents. Local elites throughout the empire competed to present their own versions of Roman-style games, creating networks of shared cultural experience that reinforced imperial unity while allowing for regional variation. However, the arena system also created economic and social pressures that contributed to long-term problems for Roman civilization. The enormous costs of spectacular entertainment diverted resources from infrastructure maintenance, military preparedness, and economic development. The emphasis on violent entertainment over productive activity influenced Roman attitudes toward work, trade, and technological innovation in ways that may have contributed to later imperial decline. The psychological effects of arena culture also influenced Roman responses to external threats and internal challenges. Citizens conditioned to expect spectacular solutions to political problems were often impatient with the gradual, unglamorous work of administration and diplomacy. The preference for dramatic gestures over sustained effort affected Roman policy-making in ways that created vulnerabilities for the empire's long-term stability. Now, let us turn our attention from the blood and spectacle of the arena to examine how individual Romans navigated the complex social hierarchies and cultural expectations that defined daily life in the world's most powerful empire. The story of Marcus Cornelius Fronto provides a fascinating window into the realities of Roman social climbing, intellectual achievement, and political survival during the empire's golden age. Marcus Cornelius Fronto wasn't born into the Roman elite. He was a provincial from North Africa who used his exceptional talents as a rhetorician and writer to climb to the highest levels of Roman society. His career illustrates both the opportunities and the dangers that characterized life in imperial Rome for ambitious individuals who possessed but lacked inherited wealth and status. Fronto arrived in Rome during the early 2nd century CE, when the empire was at the height of its power and prosperity under the Emperor Trajan. The capital city was a bewildering mixture of marble palaces and wooden slums, housing over 1 million inhabitants from every corner of the known world. For a provincial like Fronto, Rome represented unlimited opportunity and constant danger in roughly equal measure. The Roman educational system provided pathways for talented individuals from modest backgrounds to achieve prominence through intellectual achievement, but success required navigation of complex social protocols and fierce competition from aristocrats who possessed every advantage except raw talent. Fronto's specialty was rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking that was fundamental to Roman public life. In Roman society, the ability to speak persuasively was more than a useful skill. It was a form of political power that could influence legal decisions, policy debates, and social relationships. Master rhetoricians like Fronto could command enormous fees for their services and gained access to powerful patrons who valued eloquent advocacy for their interests. Fronto's rise through Roman society began with his work as a legal advocate, representing clients in the complex court system that governed everything from commercial disputes to criminal prosecutions. Roman law was extraordinarily sophisticated, but its application depended heavily on the rhetorical skills of advocates who could present evidence and arguments in ways that convinced judges and juries. The Roman legal system provided opportunities for talented advocates to demonstrate their abilities in high-profile cases that attracted attention from potential patrons. Successful lawyers could build reputations that led to more prestigious clients, higher fees, and eventual entry into political careers that might culminate in magistracies, governorships, or even senatorial rank. Fronto's breakthrough came when he attracted the attention of the Emperor Hadrian, who was known for his appreciation of intellectual achievement and his willingness to promote talented individuals regardless of their social origins. Hadrian appointed Fronto as tutor to the future Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a position that provided him with unprecedented access to imperial power and guaranteed his place in Roman history. The relationship between Fronto and Marcus Aurelius developed into a genuine friendship that lasted throughout their lives, preserved in a collection of letters that provides unique insights into the personal relationships and intellectual concerns of Rome's ruling class. These letters reveal both men as complex individuals who struggled to balance public responsibilities with private interests and philosophical commitments. Fronto's correspondence with Marcus Aurelius shows how Roman intellectuals approached the fundamental questions of ethics, politics, and personal conduct that arose from their position as rulers of a vast empire built on conquest and maintained through systematic violence. Both men were deeply influenced by Stoic philosophy, but they struggled to reconcile Stoic ideals of justice and compassion with the practical requirements of imperial administration. The letters also illustrate the enormous cultural pressures that shaped the behaviour of Rome's elite. Both Fronto and Marcus Aurelius were expected to maintain dignified public personas that reflected the gravity of their positions. but their private correspondence reveals individuals who experience doubt, frustration, and emotional vulnerability just like anyone else. Fronto's position as imperial tutor provided him with detailed knowledge of the imperial court's inner workings, including the complex relationships between emperors, senators, generals, and administrators that determined imperial policy. His letters describe a world where personal relationships were inseparable from political calculations, and where individual careers could be destroyed by misunderstandings or shifts in imperial favour. The imperial court during Hadrian's reign was particularly complex because the emperor himself was an intellectual and artist who valued cultural achievement alongside military and administrative competence. This created opportunities for individuals like Fronto who could contribute to the empire's cultural prestige, but it also created tensions between traditional Roman values that emphasized practical achievement and newer imperial preferences for Greek learning and artistic refinement. Fronto navigated these cultural tensions by positioning himself as a defender of traditional Roman literary values against what he saw as excessive Greek influence on imperial culture. His speeches and writings emphasized the superiority of Latin literature and Roman moral principles, appealing to conservative senators and administrators who shared his concerns about foreign cultural influences. This positioning proved politically astute, as it allowed Fronto to present himself as both an intellectual innovator and a defender of Roman tradition. He gained supporters among traditional Roman elites who might otherwise have been suspicious of a provincial upstart, while maintaining his reputation for learning and eloquence that appealed to emperors who valued intellectual achievement. Fronto's career reached its peak when he was appointed consul, the highest magistracy in the Roman state, and a position that guaranteed him a permanent place in the senatorial aristocracy. This achievement was remarkable for someone of his provincial origins, and demonstrated the opportunities that Roman society provided for exceptional talent combined with political skill. However, Fronto's success also illustrates the precarious nature of Roman social mobility. His position depended entirely on imperial favour and the political usefulness of his skills. When Marcus Aurelius became emperor and began to favour Stoic philosophers over rhetoricians, Fronto found himself increasingly marginalised despite their personal friendship. The decline in Fronto's influence reflected broader changes in Roman intellectual culture during the late 2nd century. The practical rhetoric that had been central to Republican political life became less important, as imperial administration became more bureaucratic, and emperors relied more heavily on appointed officials than on persuasive speakers. Fronto's later years were marked by frustration with his diminished role and concerns about the empire's future direction. His letters from this period reveal an intelligent man struggling to understand how the world he had conquered through talent and effort was changing in ways that made his skills less valuable and his achievements less secure. The story of Fronto's rise and decline illuminates the broader dynamics of Roman social mobility during the imperial period. The empire provided unprecedented opportunities for talented individuals to achieve wealth, status, and influence, but success required constant adaptation to changing political and cultural conditions that could shift without warning. Roman society's openness to social mobility was one of its greatest strengths, allowing the empire to recruit talent from throughout its territories and creating incentives for subject peoples to embrace Roman culture and values. Provincial elites like Fronto could achieve positions that would have been impossible in more rigid social systems, contributing their abilities to imperial administration while gaining personal rewards that encouraged their loyalty. But this social mobility also created instabilities that contributed to long-term imperial problems. The constant competition for imperial favour encouraged political manoeuvring that diverted energy from productive activities. The emphasis on personal relationships over institutional procedures made the system vulnerable to disruption when key individuals died or fell from favour. Fronto's career also illustrates the cultural tensions that arose as Rome evolved from a city-state ruled by citizen soldiers into a cosmopolitan empire administered by professional bureaucrats. The rhetorical skills that had been essential for political success in the Republic became less important as imperial administration became more systematic and less dependent on public persuasion. The intellectual culture that Fronto represented, deeply Roman in its values but influenced by Greek learning and provincial perspectives, reflected the empire's complex cultural synthesis. Roman elites were expected to master both traditional Latin literature and Greek philosophy, creating educational demands that required enormous time and resources while producing individuals with sophisticated but sometimes conflicting intellectual commitments. Fronto's relationship with Marcus Aurelius also demonstrates how personal friendships functioned within Roman political culture. Their correspondence shows genuine affection and mutual respect, but it also reveals how personal relationships were inevitably shaped by political considerations and social hierarchies that neither individual could ignore. The letters between Fronto and Marcus Aurelius provide unique evidence for how Romans understood the relationship between private virtue and public responsibility. Both men struggled with the tension between Stoic ideals that emphasized personal moral development and practical requirements that demanded compromise with imperfect political realities. Their friendship survived political changes and philosophical differences because both men recognized that personal relationships provided essential support for individuals who bore enormous public responsibilities. In a society where individual failure could have catastrophic consequences for millions of people, personal bonds offered emotional stability and practical advice that formal institutions couldn't provide. Fronto's legacy extends beyond his individual achievements to encompass his role in preserving and transmitting Roman literary culture during a crucial period of imperial development. His writings and correspondence provide invaluable evidence for Roman attitudes toward education, culture, and social mobility that influenced imperial policy for centuries. His career also established precedents for provincial participation in Roman intellectual life that encouraged talented individuals throughout the empire to pursue education and cultural achievement as paths to social advancement. The example of his success inspired generations of ambitious provincials to seek their fortunes in Rome, contributing to the empire's cultural vitality and administrative competence. But perhaps most importantly, Fronto's story illustrates the human dimension of Roman imperial success. Behind the marble monuments and military conquests were individuals like him, talented, ambitious, sometimes petty, often admirable, who built their careers and lives within the opportunities and constraints that Roman civilization provided. Moving from the complexities of social mobility to the intricacies of Roman engineering, let us examine how the empire's greatest architectural achievement, the Pantheon, represents not just technical mastery, but a profound statement about Roman ambitions to reshape the physical world according to their vision of cosmic order. The Pantheon, completed during Hadrian's reign around 126 CE, stands today as the best preserved Roman building and arguably the most influential architectural achievement in Western history. But its significance extends far beyond its technical innovations or aesthetic appeal. It represents the culmination of Roman efforts to create built environments that embodied their understanding of divine power, imperial authority, and cosmic harmony. The building's most famous feature, its massive concrete dome, was the largest unreinforced concrete span ever constructed until the 20th century. The dome's diameter of 142 feet equals its height from floor to ceiling, creating a perfect hemisphere that contains more than 120,000 cubic yards of concrete. This wasn't simply impressive scale, it was a calculated demonstration of Roman engineering capabilities that seemed to defy the laws of physics as understood by ancient observers. But the dome's true genius lay in its construction techniques, which solved engineering problems that had puzzled builders for centuries. Roman engineers developed a revolutionary approach to concrete construction that combined volcanic ash with lime mortar to create a material that actually grew stronger over time rather than deteriorating like conventional masonry. The concrete formula used in the Pantheon was carefully calibrated to balance strength, weight, and durability in ways that required sophisticated understanding of material science. The lower portions of the dome used dense concrete mixed with travertine and tufa aggregate for maximum strength. The upper sections employed progressively lighter materials, with pumice aggregate in the highest portions that reduced weight while maintaining structural integrity. This graduated concrete composition wasn't accidental. It reflected systematic experimentation with different material combinations that Roman engineers had been conducting for decades. The Pantheon represented the practical application of research and development activities that paralleled modern engineering science in their systematic approach to technical problems. The dome's structural system was equally innovative, distributing enormous loads through a series of concealed arches and relieving chambers that transferred weight to massive foundation walls. These hidden structural elements were invisible to visitors, but represented engineering solutions of extraordinary sophistication that wouldn't be fully understood or replicated until the Renaissance. But the Pantheon's engineering achievements were inseparable from its religious and political functions. The building was designed as a temple to all the gods. Pantheon literally means all gods in Greek, but it served equally as a monument to imperial power that demonstrated Rome's ability to create sacred spaces worthy of divine inhabitation. The building's interior space was designed to create specific psychological and spiritual effects that reinforced messages about Roman power and cosmic order. The dome's interior surface was decorated with coffers that reduced weight while creating visual patterns that drew the eye upward toward the central oculus. The circular opening at the dome's apex that provided the interior's only natural light. The oculus itself was a masterpiece of both engineering and symbolic design. The circular opening, 27 feet in diameter, had no covering or closure, leaving the interior permanently open to the sky. Rain, snow, and sunlight entered through the oculus, creating ever-changing patterns of illumination that connected the interior space directly to celestial movements and weather patterns. This direct connection between interior and exterior earth and sky, human architecture and cosmic forces wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate design choice that transformed the building into a kind of astronomical instrument that registered the passage of time through shifting patterns of light and shadow. The oculus acted as a sundial that marked not only daily time but also seasonal changes and celestial events. The floor of the Pantheon was designed with subtle drainage systems that channeled rainwater entering through the oculus to concealed drains, preventing flooding while maintaining the symbolic connection to the heavens. These drainage systems demonstrate the practical engineering skills that Roman architects applied even to buildings designed primarily for symbolic and religious purposes. The Pantheon's interior proportions were based on geometric principles that Romans believed reflected divine mathematical order. The dome's hemisphere sat atop a cylindrical wall of exactly the same diameter, creating interior space that could contain a perfect sphere. This geometric perfection wasn't merely aesthetic. It embodied Roman beliefs about the mathematical harmony that governed cosmic order. The building's entrance sequence was carefully designed to create dramatic psychological effects that reinforced its religious and political messages. Visitors approached through a traditional temple portico with massive granite columns that established expectations for a conventional rectangular sacred space. But the portico led to cylindrical interior space that defied those expectations and created experiences of awe and disorientation that emphasized the building's extraordinary character. The transition from the relatively dark portico to the brilliantly lit interior created moments of revelation that paralleled religious conversion experiences. The contrast between the familiar columnar architecture of the entrance and the unprecedented spatial effects of the interior emphasized the building's role as a gateway between earthly and divine realms. The Pantheon's location within Rome's urban fabric was equally significant. Hadrian positioned the building at the center of a complex of bathhouses, gymnasiums and gardens that created an entire district devoted to recreation and philosophical contemplation. The Pantheon served as the spiritual and architectural centerpiece of this complex, providing a sacred focus for activities that combined physical pleasure with intellectual and spiritual development. The building's relationship to surrounding structures demonstrated Roman understanding of urban planning as a comprehensive approach to shaping human behavior and social relationships. The Pantheon wasn't an isolated monument, but part of an integrated environment designed to encourage specific patterns of movement, interaction, and experience that reinforced Roman values and imperial authority. The Pantheon's influence on later architecture extends far beyond its immediate copies and adaptations. The building established design principles and construction techniques that influenced architectural development throughout the Roman Empire and continues to inspire architects today. The dome construction methods developed for the Pantheon were applied to bathhouses, basilicas, and other public buildings throughout Roman territories. But the Pantheon's deeper influence lay in its demonstration that architecture could create experiences that transcended purely practical functions. The building showed how skilled design could manipulate light, space, and proportions to create environments that affected human consciousness and behavior in ways that served religious, political, and social purposes. The psychological effects of the Pantheon's interior space were carefully calculated to create specific responses from different categories of visitors. Ordinary citizens experienced awe and reverence that reinforced their sense of imperial power and divine favour. Foreign dignitaries understood the building as a demonstration of Roman capabilities that served diplomatic and intimidation functions. Religious officials recognised architectural innovations that enhanced ritual effectiveness and ceremonial impact. The building's maintenance and operation required sophisticated administrative systems that demonstrated Roman organisational capabilities alongside their engineering skills. The Pantheon's staff included priests, custodians, security personnel, and specialised technicians who maintained the complex mechanical systems that supported its religious and ceremonial functions. The economic impact of the Pantheon extended throughout Rome's construction industry, as the building's innovations created demand for new materials, techniques, and skilled workers. The construction project stimulated technological development that had applications far beyond monumental architecture, influencing everything from residential construction to military engineering. The Pantheon also served as a training ground for architects and engineers who gained experience with advanced construction techniques that they subsequently applied to projects throughout the empire. The building functioned as both monument and educational institution, preserving and transmitting technical knowledge that supported imperial infrastructure development for centuries. The building's symbolic functions evolved over time as Roman religious and political culture changed. Originally designed as a temple to all gods, the Pantheon was later converted to Christian use, demonstrating the adaptability of Roman architectural principles to different religious contexts. This successful conversion helped preserve the building through the collapse of the Western Empire and the rise of medieval Christianity. The Pantheon's survival through 2 millennia of political upheaval, religious transformation, and urban development testifies to both the quality of its construction and the power of its architectural conception. The building continues to function today much as Hadrian intended, creating experiences of awe and contemplation that transcend specific religious or political contexts. Modern structural analysis of the Pantheon has revealed engineering sophistication that wasn't fully understood until the development of contemporary materials science and computer modelling. The building's concrete composition and structural systems anticipate principles that wouldn't be formally recognised until the 20th century, demonstrating that Roman engineering was based on empirical knowledge and practical experience that paralleled modern scientific methods. The Pantheon represents perhaps the purest expression of Roman ambitions to remake the physical world according to their vision of cosmic order and imperial authority. The building demonstrates how Roman engineering, architecture, and urban planning combined to create environments that shaped human experience in ways that reinforced the empire's cultural and political objectives. But the Pantheon also reveals the limitations of Roman architectural ambitions. Despite its technical mastery and symbolic sophistication, the building served a relatively small population of urban elites, while the majority of the empire's inhabitants lived in structures that reflected far more modest resources and aspirations. The gap between monumental achievement and daily reality characterized much of Roman civilization and contributed to social tensions that eventually undermined imperial stability. From the soaring dome of the Pantheon, let us descend into the complex underground world of Roman domestic life, where the realities of daily existence for ordinary citizens reveal both the achievements and contradictions that characterize life in history's most powerful empire. The Casa dei Veti in Pompeii, preserved by the volcanic eruption that destroyed the city in 79 CE, provides an extraordinary window into how affluent Roman families organized their domestic lives, managed their households, and balanced private comfort with social obligations. The house belonged to Aulus Vettius Conviva and Aulus Vettius Restitutus, wealthy merchants who had risen from slavery to achieve considerable prosperity and social prominence. The Vetti brothers' story illustrates one of Roman society's most remarkable features, the possibility for enslaved individuals to gain freedom and eventually achieve wealth and status that rivaled members of the traditional aristocracy. Both brothers had been born into slavery but possessed business skills that enabled them to earn their freedom and build successful commercial enterprises that generated enormous wealth. Their house demonstrates how newly wealthy Romans used domestic architecture to establish social credibility and compete for status with established elite families. The Casa dei Veti was designed according to traditional Roman architectural principles, but decorated with unprecedented luxury that showcased the owner's prosperity and cultural sophistication. The house's entrance sequence was carefully planned to impress visitors while controlling their access to private family spaces. Guests entered through a modest doorway that opened onto an atrium, a central courtyard that served as the house's ceremonial heart and business centre. The atrium's impluvium collected rainwater in a shallow pool that provided both practical water storage and symbolic connection to natural forces. The atrium was surrounded by rooms that served various functions related to the family's public life and commercial activities. The tablinum functioned as an office where the household head received clients and conducted business meetings. Side chambers provided storage for important documents, family portraits, and religious objects that established the family's historical continuity and social connections. But the real luxury of the Casa dei Veti lay in its private spaces, particularly the peristyle garden that formed the house's second courtyard. This enclosed garden represented a significant investment in both space and maintenance, demonstrating the family's wealth through their ability to dedicate valuable urban real estate to purely aesthetic purposes. The peristyle garden was decorated with elaborate frescoes, marble sculptures, and exotic plants that created an environment of sophisticated beauty designed for relaxation and private entertainment. The garden's columns, fountains, and landscaping reflected Greek aesthetic influences that appealed to Roman elites who associated Greek culture with refinement and intellectual achievement. The house's wall paintings provide invaluable evidence for Roman artistic taste, religious beliefs, and cultural values during the early imperial period. The frescoes combine mythological scenes with erotic imagery, architectural illusions with landscape paintings, creating decorative programs that reveal the owner's education, sophistication, and willingness to embrace controversial artistic themes. Some of the house's erotic artwork was remarkably explicit, reflecting Roman attitudes towards sexuality that differed dramatically from later Christian perspectives. The Romans saw artistic depictions of intimate activities as appropriate decoration for domestic spaces, viewing such imagery as celebrations of fertility and pleasure rather than sources of shame or embarrassment. The Casa dei Veti's kitchen and service areas reveal the complex logistical systems that supported wealthy Roman households. The kitchen featured sophisticated equipment for food preparation, including specialized ovens for baking bread, bronze cookware for elaborate meal preparation, and storage systems for preserving food supplies throughout the year. The house's water systems demonstrated Roman engineering applied to domestic convenience. Multiple fountains, baths, and water features required complex plumbing that delivered fresh water from municipal aqueducts, while removing wastewater through equally sophisticated drainage systems. These hydraulic systems represented significant investments that showcased both technological achievement and economic resources. The domestic staff required to maintain the Casa dei Veti numbered in the dozens, including specialized slaves and freedmen who performed functions ranging from food preparation and cleaning to financial management and personal service. This household hierarchy reflected broader Roman social structures while creating opportunities for advancement that motivated staff loyalty and effectiveness. The Veti brothers' success depended on commercial enterprises that extended throughout the Roman world, requiring sophisticated business practices and financial management that rivaled modern commercial operations. Their wealth came from trade in luxury goods, real estate investments, and financial services that connected local Pompeian markets with economic networks spanning the entire Mediterranean. Their business operations required literacy, numeracy, and cultural knowledge that challenged assumptions about the capabilities of formerly enslaved individuals. Both brothers could read and write in multiple languages, understood complex financial instruments, and maintained business relationships with partners throughout the empire. The Casa dei Veti also served as a venue for social entertainment that reinforced the family's status and extended their business networks. The house's dining rooms could accommodate elaborate banquets featuring exotic foods, expensive wines, and sophisticated entertainment that impressed guests while creating opportunities for profitable social connections. Roman dinner parties weren't simply social gatherings. They were complex cultural performances that combined business networking with artistic appreciation, philosophical discussion with political maneuvering. The Veti brothers used their domestic space to host events that advanced their commercial interests while demonstrating their cultural sophistication and social integration. The house's religious spaces reflect the complex spiritual landscape that characterized Roman domestic life. The household shrine contained images of traditional Roman deities alongside more exotic gods from throughout the empire, reflecting both conventional piety and the cosmopolitan religious attitudes that characterized wealthy urban Romans. The Vetti brothers' religious practices combined ancestral traditions with newer spiritual movements that appealed to socially mobile individuals seeking divine support for their continued prosperity. Their household gods included protective deities who watched over commercial enterprises, fertility gods who ensured family continuity, and mystery cult figures who offered promises of personal salvation and eternal happiness. The preservation of the Casa dei Vetti by Pompeii's volcanic destruction provides unique insights into the material culture that surrounded Roman domestic life. The house's contents, furniture, household objects, personal belongings, reveal the sophisticated consumer culture that had developed to serve wealthy Roman families who demanded both practical functionality and aesthetic beauty from their material possessions. The Vetti brothers owned elaborate bronze vessels, decorated ceramic tableware, expensive textiles, and imported luxury items that demonstrated their wealth while serving practical domestic functions. These objects came from workshops throughout the empire and represented sophisticated manufacturing capabilities that produced goods specifically designed for affluent Roman consumers. The house's decoration also reveals the cultural tensions that characterized Roman attitudes toward wealth, status, and social mobility. The Vetti brothers were clearly proud of their achievements and eager to display their prosperity, but they were also conscious of potential criticism from traditional elites who might view their success as inappropriate for former slaves. Their decorative choices balanced ostentation with restraint, luxury with traditional values, innovation with respect for established customs. The result was a domestic environment that asserted their social legitimacy while acknowledging the cultural hierarchies that continued to influence Roman social relationships. The Casa dei Vetti's fate during Pompeii's destruction provides poignant evidence for how ordinary Romans faced extraordinary crises. Archaeological evidence suggests that the house's inhabitants attempted to protect their most valuable possessions during the volcanic emergency, but ultimately succumbed to forces beyond human control or resistance. The preservation of their home and possessions has allowed modern observers to understand Roman domestic life with unprecedented detail and immediacy. The Vetti brothers' story demonstrates both the opportunities and vulnerabilities that characterized life in Roman society, where individual success depended on personal ability but remained subject to forces, political, economic, natural, that no individual could control or predict. Their achievement in rising from slavery to prosperity illustrates Roman society's remarkable openness to social mobility, but their ultimate fate reminds us of the precarious nature of all human achievement in the face of historical forces that operate beyond individual agency or control. Now let us journey to the frontiers of Roman power, where the empire's expansion created encounters between Roman civilization and indigenous cultures that produced some of history's most dramatic conflicts and unexpected alliances. The story of Vercingetorix and his rebellion against Julius Caesar in Gaul reveals both the methods Rome used to extend its dominion and the resistance strategies that indigenous peoples developed to preserve their independence. Vercingetorix was a young Gallic nobleman from the Arverni tribe who possessed the military genius, political skills, and charismatic leadership necessary to unite the traditionally fractious Gallic tribes against Roman conquest. His rebellion in 52 BCE represented the most serious threat to Roman expansion that Caesar faced during his 8-year campaign to conquer Gaul. The Gallic tribes that Vercingetorix united possessed military capabilities that rivaled Roman forces in many respects. Gallic warriors were renowned for their individual courage and fighting skills, their cavalry was superior to Roman mounted forces, and their knowledge of local terrain gave them significant tactical advantages over Roman armies operating in unfamiliar territory. But Gallic military strength was traditionally undermined by political fragmentation that prevented sustained cooperation between tribes who viewed each other as rivals or enemies. Vercingetorix's greatest achievement was overcoming these traditional divisions to create a unified Gallic resistance that could challenge Roman military supremacy through coordinated strategy rather than individual tribal courage. Vercingetorix understood that conventional battle tactics that relied on Gallic warrior traditions would ultimately fail against Roman disciplined infantry formations and superior siege equipment. Instead, he developed innovative guerrilla strategies that exploited Roman weaknesses while avoiding direct confrontations that would favour Roman tactical advantages. His strategy combined economic warfare with hit-and-run tactics, designed to exhaust Roman forces while preserving Gallic military strength for decisive engagements fought on favourable terms. Vercingetorix ordered the destruction of Gallic towns and agricultural resources that might support Roman armies, forcing Caesar's forces to operate in hostile territory without reliable supply sources. This scorched earth approach required enormous sacrifice from Gallic populations who were forced to destroy their own communities to deny resources to Roman invaders. Vercingetorix's ability to convince Gallic tribes to accept such sacrifices demonstrates both his persuasive powers and the desperate determination that motivated Gallic resistance to Roman conquest. The psychological dimensions of Vercingetorix's leadership were as important as his military innovations. He successfully transformed Gallic resistance from a collection of traditional tribal conflicts into a patriotic movement that appealed to shared cultural identity and common opposition to foreign domination. Vercingetorix's speeches to his followers emphasized themes that transcended tribal loyalties: Gallic freedom versus Roman slavery, ancestral traditions versus foreign impositions, the defense of homeland versus imperial conquest. These appeals created emotional bonds that sustained Gallic unity, despite military setbacks and enormous hardships. His personal charisma was enhanced by his youth, physical courage, and willingness to share the dangers and privations that he demanded from his followers. Unlike many aristocratic leaders who commanded from safety, Vercingetorix fought alongside his warriors and demonstrated personal commitment to the cause that inspired extraordinary loyalty from his diverse tribal coalition. The military campaigns between Vercingetorix and Caesar represented a clash between two fundamentally different approaches to warfare. Caesar relied on systematic application of Roman military doctrine that emphasized disciplined infantry formations, sophisticated siege techniques, and logistical superiority that could sustain prolonged operations. Vercingetorix countered with flexible tactics that adapted to changing circumstances while avoiding the type of conventional engagements where Roman advantages would prove decisive. His forces used hit-and-run attacks, ambush tactics, and strategic retreats that frustrated Roman efforts to force decisive battles on Roman terms. The campaign's turning point came at the Siege of Alesia, where Vercingetorix made the strategic decision to concentrate Gallic forces in a fortified position that he believed could withstand Roman assault while serving as a rallying point for tribes throughout Gaul. This decision reflected both the strengths and limitations of his leadership style. Vercingetorix correctly calculated that a successful defence of Alesia would demonstrate Gallic military capability and inspire broader resistance throughout Gaul. But he underestimated Roman engineering capabilities and Caesar's willingness to undertake the enormous logistical challenges required for an extended siege of a heavily fortified position. Caesar's response to the Alesia challenge demonstrated the Roman military system at its most impressive. Roman engineers constructed elaborate siege works that completely surrounded the Gallic fortress, while simultaneously creating defensive positions that protected the Roman army from Gallic relief forces attempting to break the siege. The engineering achievement at Alesia was extraordinary even by Roman standards. Caesar's forces built two complete sets of fortifications, an inner ring that prevented Gallic forces from escaping Alesia, and an outer ring that protected the Roman army from external attack. These fortifications included trenches, palisades, obstacles, and defensive positions that created multiple layers of protection for Roman forces. The construction of these siege works required enormous labour that was accomplished under constant threat of Gallic attack. Roman soldiers had to dig miles of trenches, build thousands of yards of wooden fortifications, and create complex defensive systems that could withstand assault from multiple directions simultaneously. The logistics of supplying the Roman army during the Alesia siege were equally impressive. Caesar had to maintain supply lines that stretched hundreds of miles through hostile territory, while supporting an army that numbered in the tens of thousands. This required organizational capabilities that few ancient societies could match. The psychological warfare dimensions of the Alesia siege were as important as its military aspects. Caesar understood that the siege's outcome would be determined as much by morale and endurance as by tactical skill or engineering capability. Both sides engaged in propaganda efforts designed to maintain their own forces' determination while undermining enemy resolve. Vercingetorix faced the enormous challenge of maintaining Gallic unity and fighting spirit during a siege that subjected his forces to increasing hardship, while demonstrating Roman capabilities that exceeded Gallic expectations. His leadership during the siege's final phases revealed both his personal courage and the limitations of charismatic authority when confronted with overwhelming practical difficulties. The siege's climax came when Gallic relief forces attempted to break Caesar's siege lines through coordinated attacks from multiple directions. This represented the largest and most complex battle of Caesar's Gallic campaigns, involving over 100,000 warriors on the Gallic side and testing Roman military capabilities to their limits. The battle's outcome depended on Caesar's personal leadership during the crisis, moments when Roman lines were under maximum pressure. Caesar's decision to personally lead a cavalry charge that broke the Gallic attack demonstrated the importance of individual leadership in determining the outcomes of ancient battles. Vercingetorix's surrender following the failure of the relief efforts was calculated to preserve the lives of his remaining followers, rather than continue futile resistance that would result in their destruction. His decision to sacrifice himself to save his people revealed the noble qualities that had made him an effective leader while acknowledging the reality of Roman victory. Caesar's treatment of Vercingetorix after his surrender reflected Roman approaches to defeated enemies that combined pragmatic calculation with symbolic messaging. Vercingetorix was preserved for Caesar's triumph in Rome, where his presence would demonstrate the significance of Caesar's victory while serving Roman propaganda purposes. The Gallic leader's eventual execution followed Roman precedents for dealing with enemy leaders who had posed serious threats to Roman interests. But the delay between his capture and death allowed Vercingetorix to become a symbol of resistance that inspired later opposition to Roman rule throughout the empire. The legacy of Vercingetorix's rebellion extended far beyond its immediate military and political consequences. His successful unification of Gallic tribes demonstrated the potential for indigenous resistance to Roman expansion, encouraging similar attempts at coordinated opposition in other frontier regions. His innovative military tactics influenced the development of guerrilla warfare strategies that were subsequently used by other peoples facing Roman conquest. The combination of economic warfare, hit-and-run tactics, and psychological operations that Vercingetorix employed became standard approaches for indigenous forces fighting technologically superior imperial armies. But perhaps most importantly, Vercingetorix's story illustrates the human costs of Roman imperial expansion. His rebellion represented the desperate attempts of traditional societies to preserve their independence and cultural identity against foreign conquest that threatened to destroy everything they valued. The ultimate failure of Gallic resistance to Roman conquest had profound consequences for European cultural development. The Romanization of Gaul eliminated indigenous political structures, religious traditions, and social customs that had developed over centuries, replacing them with imperial institutions that served Roman rather than Gallic interests. However, the process of Romanization wasn't simply cultural destruction. It also created opportunities for Gallic elites who adapted to Roman systems to achieve wealth, status, and influence within imperial structures. Many Gallic nobles eventually became Roman citizens, senators, and even emperors, demonstrating the empire's capacity to integrate former enemies into its ruling class. The transformation of Gaul from a collection of independent tribes into a prosperous Roman province illustrates both the destructive and creative aspects of Roman imperial expansion. Roman conquest eliminated indigenous political independence, but created economic and cultural opportunities that benefited many inhabitants of the conquered territories. Vercingetorix's story also reveals the personal dimensions of historical change that affected millions of individuals whose lives were disrupted by the collision between expanding imperial power and traditional local societies. His rebellion represented not just military resistance, but a desperate attempt to preserve ways of life that were threatened by forces beyond local control. The heroic aspects of Vercingetorix's leadership, his courage, charisma, and willingness to sacrifice himself for his people, have inspired admiration across centuries and cultures. but his story also illustrates the tragic dimensions of historical conflicts where admirable individuals on both sides pursue goals that cannot be reconciled through negotiation or compromise. From the battlefields of Gaul, let us turn to examine the extraordinary engineering projects that Rome undertook to support its vast territorial holdings and urban populations. The construction of Hadrian's Wall across northern Britain represents perhaps the empire's most ambitious frontier fortification project, and reveals both the capabilities and limitations of Roman imperial administration. Hadrian's Wall was built beginning in 122 CE to mark the northern boundary of Roman Britain and control interaction between Roman territories and the unconquered tribes of Scotland. The wall stretched 84 miles from coast to coast across the narrowest part of northern England, creating a continuous barrier that served both military and administrative functions. The wall's construction required enormous resources and organisational capabilities that demonstrated Roman engineering and administrative skills at their peak. The project involved thousands of workers, Roman soldiers, auxiliary troops and civilian contractors, who laboured for over 6 years to complete the fortification system. The wall itself was only one component of a comprehensive defence system that included forts, mile castles, turrets, and a military road that connected all the installations. The entire system required careful planning and coordination that integrated military requirements with logistical constraints and local geographical conditions. The wall's design reflected sophisticated understanding of defensive architecture and siege warfare that Roman military engineers had developed through centuries of frontier experience. The fortification wasn't simply a barrier, it was an integrated system designed to control movement, gather intelligence, and project Roman power into unconquered territories. The wall's height varied between 15 and 20 feet, with additional parapet walls that brought the total height to nearly 30 feet in some sections. The width ranged from 6 to 10 feet, providing space for guard patrols and equipment storage. These dimensions were calculated to prevent enemies from scaling the wall while providing adequate defensive positions for Roman forces. The construction techniques used for Hadrian's Wall demonstrated Roman mastery of stone masonry and concrete construction that produced structures built to last for centuries. The wall's foundation was laid on solid bedrock wherever possible, with sophisticated drainage systems that prevented water damage and frost heaving that could undermine structural integrity. The wall's mile castles were small forts positioned at 1-mile intervals that provided accommodation for garrison forces and controlled access through gates that allowed authorised passage between Roman and non-Roman territories. These installations were carefully designed to provide both security and convenience for the administrators who managed frontier trade and diplomacy. Between each pair of mile castles, 2 turrets provided observation points and communication stations that allowed rapid transmission of information along the entire length of the wall. This communication system enabled coordinated responses to threats and ensured that frontier commanders maintained constant awareness of conditions throughout their area of responsibility. The wall's major forts housed larger garrison forces and served as administrative centres that managed civilian as well as military affairs in frontier regions. These forts included sophisticated facilities for food storage, equipment maintenance, medical care, and religious observances that supported permanent military communities. The construction of Hadrian's Wall required solution of complex logistical problems that tested Roman organisational capabilities. Building materials had to be quarried, transported and positioned along 84 miles of difficult terrain that included marshes, rivers, crags and forests, and the workforce included specialised craftsmen, stonemasons, carpenters, metalworkers, surveyors, whose skills were essential for construction of sophisticated military installations. These specialists had to be recruited, trained, equipped and supervised according to standards that ensured consistent quality across the entire project. The wall's construction also required coordination with local populations who possessed knowledge of terrain, weather patterns, and resource availability that Roman engineers needed for successful project completion. This coordination involved complex negotiations that balanced Roman security requirements with local economic and social interests. The economic impact of the wall's construction extended throughout northern Britain and influenced development patterns for decades after the project's completion. The demand for building materials stimulated quarrying operations. The need for food and supplies created markets for local farmers, and the presence of thousands of workers attracted merchants and service providers. But the wall's deeper significance lay in its role as a symbol of Roman imperial authority and cultural boundary. The fortification marked not just a military frontier, but a civilizational divide that separated Roman order from barbarian chaos, imperial law from tribal custom, urban culture from rural tradition. The wall's psychological impact on both Roman and non-Roman populations was as important as its military functions. For Roman citizens, the wall represented imperial power and engineering capability that could reshape entire landscapes according to Roman strategic requirements. For unconquered tribes, the wall demonstrated Roman determination and resources that warned against challenging imperial authority. The garrison forces that manned Hadrian's Wall came from throughout the Roman Empire, creating multicultural military communities that reflected imperial diversity while serving imperial unity. Soldiers from Spain, Germany, the Balkans and the Middle East served alongside British recruits in units that demonstrated the empire's ability to integrate diverse populations into effective military forces. These frontier communities developed distinctive cultures that combined military traditions with local adaptations and cross-cultural exchanges. Archaeological evidence from wall installations reveals material cultures that mixed Roman military equipment with local crafts, imperial religious practices with regional spiritual traditions, and standardized military architecture with regional construction techniques. The wall's maintenance and operation required sophisticated administrative systems that coordinated military and civilian authorities throughout northern Britain. The frontier administration managed not only defensive operations, but also trade relationships, diplomatic contacts, and economic development that affected populations on both sides of the imperial boundary. The success of Hadrian's Wall as a frontier control system depended on its integration with broader Roman administrative and military structures that extended throughout Britain and connected to imperial institutions in other provinces. The wall wasn't an isolated fortification, but part of a comprehensive imperial system that managed frontiers throughout the empire. However, the wall also represented the limits of Roman expansion and the empire's acknowledgement that further conquest might not be practical or profitable. The decision to build a permanent fortification rather than continue military campaigns northward reflected imperial strategic assessments that prioritized consolidation over continued expansion. The wall's effectiveness as a defensive system varied over time as military technology, political conditions, and economic circumstances changed. The fortification successfully controlled small-scale raids and regulated frontier trade, but it couldn't prevent large-scale invasions when political instability weakened Roman military capabilities. The wall's ultimate fate reflected broader patterns of imperial decline that affected frontier defences throughout the empire. As Roman military strength declined and political authority fragmented, frontier fortifications like Hadrian's Wall became increasingly difficult to maintain and eventually were abandoned as imperial authority collapsed. But the wall's legacy extends far beyond its military and administrative functions during the Roman period. The fortification became a symbol of human ambition and engineering achievement that continues to inspire admiration and wonder nearly 2 millennia after its construction. Modern archaeological investigation of Hadrian's Wall has revealed construction techniques and organizational methods that demonstrate Roman engineering capabilities that weren't matched again until the Industrial Revolution. The project's scope, complexity, and durability provide evidence for administrative and technical skills that challenge assumptions about ancient technological limitations. The wall also serves as a monument to the thousands of individuals, soldiers, craftsmen, administrators, local residents, whose labour and skills created one of humanity's most impressive architectural achievements. Their collective effort produced a structure that continues to inspire wonder and respect for human capability when organised and directed toward ambitious goals. From the windswept heights of Hadrian's Wall, let us journey south to the sun-baked arenas of North Africa, where the empire's expansion created opportunities for cultural synthesis and individual achievement that produced some of Rome's most remarkable figures. The story of Lucius Apuleius provides a fascinating glimpse into how provincial intellectuals navigated Roman cultural expectations while preserving and transforming their own cultural traditions. Lucius Apuleius was born in the North African city of Madaros around 125 CE, during the reign of Hadrian. when Roman North Africa was experiencing unprecedented prosperity and cultural vitality. His hometown was a thriving commercial centre that benefited from Roman peace while maintaining strong connections to indigenous Berber traditions and Greek intellectual culture. Apuleius represented the complex cultural synthesis that characterized Roman Africa, where Latin, Greek, and indigenous languages coexisted, where Roman institutions operated alongside traditional social structures, and where intellectual achievement provided pathways to social mobility for ambitious individuals regardless of their ethnic backgrounds. His early education in Madaros exposed him to the multicultural learning environment that flourished in Roman Africa's urban centres. He studied Latin literature, Greek philosophy, rhetoric, and traditional African wisdom traditions that provided him with intellectual resources drawn from multiple cultural traditions. Apuleius's advanced education took him to Carthage and Athens, where he studied philosophy, mathematics, natural science, and religious mysteries that prepared him for careers in law, education, or imperial administration. His educational journey illustrates the mobility and opportunities that Roman civilization provided for talented provincials who could master the cultural competencies that defined elite status. His most famous work, The Golden Ass, represents one of ancient literature's most sophisticated achievements and demonstrates the creative possibilities that emerge from the cultural fusion that characterized Roman provincial life. The novel combines Roman literary techniques with African storytelling traditions, Greek philosophical themes with indigenous religious practices, creating a work that transcends any single cultural tradition. The Golden Ass tells the story of Lucius, a young man whose curiosity about magic leads to his transformation into a donkey, and his subsequent adventures as he attempts to regain human form. The narrative provides a satirical tour of Roman society that reveals the gap between imperial ideals and social realities, while exploring philosophical questions about human nature, divine intervention, and moral transformation. The novel's structure reflects Apuleius's mastery of multiple literary traditions. The main narrative incorporates numerous shorter tales that demonstrate his familiarity with folktale traditions from throughout the Mediterranean world. These embedded stories function simultaneously as entertainment, moral instruction, and cultural commentary that reveals the author's sophisticated understanding of literature's social functions. The work's religious dimensions reflect the complex spiritual landscape of Roman North Africa, where traditional Roman gods coexisted with Egyptian deities, Greek mystery religions, and indigenous African spiritual traditions. Apuleius's personal religious journey, as reflected in his novel, demonstrates the syncretic approaches to spirituality that characterized imperial religious culture. The novel's climax features the protagonist's salvation through the intervention of the goddess Isis, whose mystery religion offered personal redemption and spiritual transformation that appealed to individuals seeking meaning beyond conventional Roman religious practices. Apuleius's detailed description of Isis worship provides valuable evidence for how mystery religions functioned within Roman religious culture. But The Golden Ass wasn't simply a literary achievement. It was also a social commentary that revealed the contradictions and tensions that characterized Roman imperial society. The novel's satirical episodes expose corruption in legal systems, exploitation in economic relationships, and hypocrisy in religious institutions that undermined official claims about imperial justice and prosperity. Apuleius's social criticism was sophisticated enough to avoid direct political confrontation while providing pointed commentary on imperial society's failures and limitations. His use of allegory, humour, and fantastic elements allowed him to address sensitive topics without challenging imperial authority directly. The novel's popularity throughout the Roman world demonstrates the appeal of cultural productions that combined entertainment with social commentary and spiritual exploration. The Golden Ass provided readers with escape from daily concerns while encouraging reflection on moral and philosophical questions that addressed fundamental human experiences. Apuleius's career as a public speaker and legal advocate illustrates how provincial intellectuals could achieve prominence within Roman society while maintaining connections to their regional cultural traditions. His speeches, several of which survive, demonstrate his mastery of rhetorical techniques that were essential for success in Roman public life. His legal troubles, stemming from accusations that he used magic to influence a wealthy widow's decision to marry him, provide fascinating insights into Roman attitudes toward religion, marriage, and social mobility. The trial record reveals the complex social tensions that surrounded successful provincials who challenged traditional hierarchies through personal achievement. Apuleius's defense against the magic charges demonstrates his intellectual sophistication and cultural knowledge that enabled him to transform legal difficulties into opportunities for philosophical discourse and rhetorical display. His courtroom performance combined legal argumentation with philosophical reflection and personal narrative that impressed contemporary observers and influenced later literary development. The accusations against Apuleius reflected broader social anxieties about the changes that Roman imperial expansion had created in traditional social relationships. Successful provincials like Apuleius challenged established hierarchies and cultural boundaries in ways that created opportunities for advancement while generating resistance from conservative elements who preferred traditional arrangements. His marriage to Pudentilla, the wealthy widow whose affections allegedly resulted from magical influence, illustrates the complex intersection of personal relationships, economic interests, and social mobility that characterized Roman provincial society. The relationship provided mutual benefits: financial resources for Apuleius, intellectual companionship for Pudentilla, while challenging conventional expectations about marriage and social status. The trial's outcome, which apparently resulted in Apuleius's acquittal and continued prosperity, demonstrates the opportunities that Roman legal systems provided for individuals who possessed the rhetorical skills and cultural knowledge necessary to navigate complex judicial procedures. Apuleius's later career as a priest and philosopher in Carthage shows how successful provincials could achieve social prominence while contributing to their regional communities' cultural and intellectual development. His public lectures and religious activities made him a prominent figure in North African intellectual life, who influenced subsequent generations of writers and thinkers. His philosophical works, which combine Platonic metaphysics with Stoic ethics and religious mysticism, reflect the syncretic intellectual approaches that characterized imperial philosophical culture. Apuleius wasn't simply adopting Greek philosophical traditions, but was creating new syntheses that incorporated insights from multiple cultural sources. The influence of Apuleius's work extended far beyond his lifetime and regional context. The Golden Ass became a foundational text for later European literature, inspiring writers from Augustine to Boccaccio to Cervantes, who found in his work models for combining entertainment with serious intellectual content. His approach to cultural synthesis, combining rather than choosing between different traditions, anticipated patterns of cultural development that would characterize post-Roman European civilization. The medieval and Renaissance writers who drew inspiration from Apuleius were following his example of creating new cultural forms through creative combination of diverse inherited traditions. Apuleius's story also illustrates the personal dimensions of Roman imperial expansion and cultural transformation. His individual success resulted from opportunities that imperial expansion created, but his achievements also contributed to the cultural vitality that sustained imperial civilization and provided models for creative adaptation to changing historical circumstances. The complex identity that Apuleius embodied, African by birth, Roman by education, Greek by philosophical orientation, universal in literary appeal, reflects the cosmopolitan possibilities that Roman imperial culture created while maintaining connections to local traditions and regional identities. His life and work demonstrate that Roman civilization's greatest achievements often resulted not from the imposition of uniform imperial culture, but from the creative tensions and syntheses that emerged when different cultural traditions encountered each other within imperial frameworks that encouraged rather than suppressed cultural innovation. But even as figures like Apuleius achieved remarkable success within Roman imperial culture, the empire's long-term stability was being undermined by economic pressures, political instabilities, and military challenges that would eventually overwhelm the administrative and cultural systems that had sustained imperial civilization for centuries. The 3rd century CE witnessed a series of crises that tested Roman imperial resilience to its limits and revealed both the strengths and vulnerabilities that characterized the world's most successful ancient empire. The period known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century saw the empire fragment into competing regional authorities, face devastating barbarian invasions, and struggle with inflation and economic disruption that threatened the foundations of imperial prosperity. The crisis began with the assassination of Emperor Alexander Severus in 235 CE. which triggered a period of political instability that saw over 50 individuals claim imperial authority during the following 50 years. This political chaos undermined the administrative systems that had maintained imperial unity and created opportunities for external enemies and internal rebels to challenge Roman authority throughout the empire. The political instability was compounded by military pressures that stretched Roman resources beyond their limits. Barbarian tribes along the Rhine and Danube frontiers launched coordinated attacks that penetrated deep into Roman territory, while Persian forces in the east captured Roman emperors and occupied entire provinces. These military disasters revealed the limitations of Roman military systems that had been designed for offensive campaigns rather than defensive operations along extended frontiers. The empire's military resources, impressive as they were, couldn't simultaneously defend thousands of miles of frontier while maintaining internal security and supporting imperial administration. The economic consequences of prolonged military emergency were equally devastating. The costs of maintaining larger armies, rebuilding destroyed cities, and ransoming captured territories forced imperial governments to debase the currency, leading to inflation that disrupted trade and undermined confidence in imperial institutions. The social impact of the 3rd century crisis extended throughout Roman society, affecting everyone from imperial aristocrats to urban workers to rural farmers. Traditional social hierarchies were disrupted by military necessity, economic opportunity, and political upheaval that created new forms of advancement while destroying established patterns of wealth and status. Yet the empire's survival of the 3rd century crisis also demonstrated the resilience and adaptability that had enabled Roman civilization to overcome previous challenges and continue expanding for centuries. The administrative, military, and cultural systems that Romans had developed proved capable of evolution and adaptation that eventually restored stability and prosperity. The reforms implemented by emperors like Diocletian and Constantine during the late 3rd and early 4th centuries restructured imperial government, military organization, and economic policy in ways that addressed the systemic problems that had created the crisis while preserving the essential features that defined Roman civilization. These reforms created what historians call the late Roman Empire, which differed significantly from earlier imperial forms but maintained continuity with Roman traditions while adapting to changed circumstances. The late empire successfully defended its territories, maintained prosperity, and supported cultural achievement for several more centuries. However, the 3rd century crisis also marked the beginning of transformations that would eventually lead to the end of Roman imperial civilization in Western Europe and its transformation into Byzantine civilization in the East. The crisis revealed that even the most successful imperial systems have limitations and vulnerabilities that can eventually overwhelm their adaptive capabilities. The story of Rome's 3rd century crisis and recovery provides valuable lessons about the dynamics of imperial rise and decline, the relationship between political stability and economic prosperity, and the role of leadership and institutional adaptation in managing historical challenges that threaten civilizational continuity. But perhaps most importantly, the crisis illustrates the human costs of historical transformation that affected millions of individuals whose lives were disrupted by forces beyond their control or understanding. The collapse and restoration of imperial order created opportunities for some while destroying the security and prosperity that others had known throughout their lifetimes. As we reach the end of our journey through 2 millennia of Roman civilization, we can see that Rome's legacy extends far beyond its military conquests or architectural monuments. Roman civilization created institutions, cultural patterns, and ways of thinking about government, law, and social organization that continue to influence contemporary life in ways we rarely recognize or acknowledge. The Roman Empire's greatest achievement wasn't its territorial extent or material prosperity, but its demonstration that diverse populations could be integrated into stable political systems that provided security, justice, and opportunity for human flourishing on an unprecedented scale. This achievement required not just military power or administrative efficiency, but cultural wisdom and political imagination that recognized the benefits of unity while respecting the value of diversity. The Romans weren't perfect. Their society included slavery, exploitation, and violence that we rightly condemn, but their civilization also produced legal systems that protected individual rights, engineering achievements that improved human life, and cultural innovations that enriched human experience in ways that continue to benefit us today. Perhaps most remarkably, Roman civilization lasted for over 1,000 years in the West, and continued for another 1,000 years in the East, demonstrating a longevity and adaptability that no other imperial system has matched. This longevity resulted not from rigid adherence to unchanging traditions, but from creative adaptation to changing circumstances that preserved essential values while embracing necessary innovations. The Roman example shows us that human societies can achieve remarkable things when they combine ambition with wisdom, power with restraint, and pride with openness to learning from others. The Romans built their empire not just through conquest, but through inclusion, not just through force, but through the attractiveness of the opportunities and security that Roman citizenship provided. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of marble forums where citizens debated the future of their republic, of legions marching along straight roads that connected the known world, of gladiators facing death with courage in arenas that still echo with the roar of ancient crowds, of engineers building aqueducts that brought fresh water to millions, of writers and philosophers whose words still speak to us across 2,000 years of history. The Romans believed they were building something eternal, and in many ways they were right. Their city fell, their empire dissolved, their language evolved into other tongues, but their influence on law, government, architecture, literature, and the very idea of civilization itself remains as strong today as it was when Rome ruled the Mediterranean world. Sleep well, and may your dreams carry you along the Roman roads that lead not just to Rome, but to understanding of what humans can achieve when they dare to think beyond the boundaries of their own time and place, when they build not just for themselves, but for the future, when they create not just power, but lasting meaning that enriches the human experience long after the creators have returned to dust. But there are deeper currents in Roman history that deserve our exploration before we close this journey through the corridors of power and the streets of the ancient world. Let us delve further into the intricate mechanisms that made Roman civilization function on such an unprecedented scale. The Roman postal system, known as the cursus publicus, represents one of history's most sophisticated communication networks, and reveals the administrative genius that enabled Rome to govern territories spanning 3 continents. Established by Augustus around 20 BCE, this system created the infrastructure for rapid information transmission that was essential for imperial administration, military coordination, and economic management across vast distances. The cursus publicus operated through a network of way stations positioned at intervals of 12 to 15 miles along major Roman roads. These stations, called mutations for horse changes and mansions for overnight accommodation, maintained fresh horses, supplies, and personnel that enabled imperial messengers to travel at speeds that wouldn't be matched again until the development of modern transportation systems. The system's efficiency was remarkable by ancient standards. Imperial messengers could cover 150 miles per day on major routes, allowing communications to travel from Rome to London in about 40 days, or from Rome to Antioch in approximately 35 days. This communication speed enabled imperial administrators to coordinate policy across the empire with a responsiveness that was impossible for any previous government to achieve. The cursus publicus required enormous logistical support that demonstrates the empire's organizational capabilities. The system employed thousands of horses, hundreds of vehicles, and countless personnel who maintained way stations, bred horses, manufactured equipment, and provided security for official communications. The economic impact of this infrastructure extended throughout the empire and influenced development patterns in regions that served major communication routes. Access to the cursus publicus was strictly controlled through a permit system that reflected imperial priorities and social hierarchies. Only officials carrying imperial authorization could use the system's resources, ensuring that government communications received priority while preventing unauthorized individuals from overwhelming the system's capacity. The permits themselves were sophisticated documents that specified authorized routes, transportation methods, and accommodation levels that reflected the traveller's rank and mission importance. High-ranking officials received permits for luxury transportation with multiple horses and elaborate accommodations, while lower-level functionaries were authorized for basic transportation that provided speed without unnecessary expense. The social implications of the cursus publicus extended beyond its practical functions to influence Roman concepts of space, time, and imperial unity. The system made the empire seem smaller and more manageable by reducing the time required for communication and travel between distant regions. This psychological effect was as important as the system's practical benefits in maintaining imperial cohesion. The cursus publicus also created career opportunities for individuals who possessed the skills needed to operate such a complex system. Postal administrators, horse breeders, vehicle manufacturers, and way station managers developed specialized expertise that was essential for imperial administration. These careers provided social mobility for talented individuals while creating professional networks that reinforced imperial unity. But the postal system's deeper significance lay in its role as a model for systematic organization that influenced other aspects of Roman administration. The principles developed for managing long-distance communication, standardization, hierarchy, quality control, resource allocation, were applied to military logistics, tax collection, legal administration, and urban planning throughout the empire. The Cursus Publicus demonstrates how Roman administrative innovation created capabilities that enabled governance on a scale that previous civilizations couldn't achieve. The system's success required not just engineering and logistics, but also sophisticated understanding of human psychology, organizational behavior, and information management that paralleled modern administrative science. Now let us examine the Roman military's evolution from the citizen soldiers of the early Republic to the professional legions that conquered the Mediterranean world. The Marian reforms of 107 BCE fundamentally transformed Roman military organization and created the professional army that would dominate ancient warfare for the next 5 centuries. Before Gaius Marius, Roman armies were composed of citizen soldiers who served for specific campaigns and then returned to their civilian occupations. This system worked well for defending Roman territory and conducting short-term operations, but it was inadequate for the prolonged campaigns required to conquer and hold distant territories. Marius revolutionized Roman military organization by creating professional legions composed of volunteers who served for 25 years and received standardized equipment, training, and compensation from the state. This transformation created military units with unprecedented discipline, experience, and loyalty that could sustain complex operations across multiple campaign seasons. The professional legions developed tactical innovations that gave Rome decisive advantages over enemies who relied on traditional military systems. The manipular formation was replaced by cohort organization that provided greater flexibility and striking power. Standardized equipment and training created units that could operate effectively in diverse geographical and tactical conditions. Roman military engineering capabilities, developed through generations of campaign experience, enabled the legions to overcome obstacles that stopped other armies. Roman soldiers were trained not just as fighters, but as engineers who could construct siege equipment, build fortifications, construct bridges, and create infrastructure that supported military operations while demonstrating Roman technological superiority. The psychological impact of Roman military professionalism was as important as its tactical advantages. Enemies facing Roman legions confronted soldiers who were not just individually skilled, but collectively organized according to principles that maximized unit effectiveness, while minimizing Roman casualties. This professional competence created reputation effects that often won battles before fighting began. Roman military logistics represented perhaps the most sophisticated supply system in ancient history. Roman armies could sustain operations for months or years in hostile territory through supply networks that coordinated agricultural production, manufacturing, transportation, and distribution across the empire. This logistical capability enabled strategic flexibility that was impossible for armies dependent on local foraging or irregular supply trains. The legion's construction capabilities were as impressive as their fighting skills. Roman soldiers built roads, aqueducts, fortifications, and urban infrastructure throughout the empire, creating permanent improvements that benefited civilian populations while supporting military objectives. This dual function, military and civilian construction, made Roman conquest attractive to local populations who gained immediate material benefits from Roman occupation. Roman military discipline was legendary throughout the ancient world and represented a systematic approach to behavior modification that created units with extraordinary cohesion and effectiveness. Discipline wasn't just punishment for misconduct, but comprehensive training that developed psychological resilience, tactical competence, and unit loyalty that enabled Roman forces to perform effectively under extreme stress. The Roman military's reward system balanced individual recognition with unit cohesion in ways that motivated exceptional performance while maintaining collective effectiveness. Military decorations, promotion opportunities, and retirement benefits provided incentives for individual excellence, while unit-based rewards encouraged cooperation and mutual support that enhanced overall military performance. Roman military medicine represented the ancient world's most advanced approach to battlefield healthcare and reveals the empire's systematic attention to preserving human resources. Military hospitals, surgical techniques, and preventive medicine practices developed by Roman military physicians influenced civilian medical practices throughout the empire and established standards that weren't surpassed until modern times. The legion's role in Romanizing conquered territories extended far beyond military occupation, to include cultural transmission, economic development, and social integration that transformed provincial societies. Roman soldiers served as agents of imperial culture who introduced Roman law, language, architecture, and customs to populations throughout the empire. Roman military veterans received land grants and citizenship privileges that created networks of Roman influence throughout conquered territories. These veteran colonies served as centers of Roman culture and economic activity that anchored imperial control while providing security and prosperity for local populations who adapted to Roman systems. The integration of auxiliary forces from throughout the empire into Roman military organization demonstrates the empire's ability to incorporate diverse populations into effective military units, while respecting local traditions and capabilities. Auxiliary units retained distinctive weapons, tactics, and cultural characteristics, while adopting Roman discipline and organization. This military diversity created Roman armies that combined the empire's best military traditions while maintaining Roman command structure and strategic objectives. Germanic cavalry, Gallic infantry, Eastern archers, and African light troops served alongside Roman legions in integrated formations that maximized tactical effectiveness while creating cross-cultural military communities. The Roman navy, though less famous than the legions, represented equally sophisticated organizational and technological achievements that enabled Rome to control Mediterranean trade routes and conduct amphibious operations throughout the empire. Roman naval engineering produced warships that combined speed, maneuverability, and firepower in designs that dominated ancient naval warfare. Roman naval logistics supported military operations that required coordination between land and sea forces across vast distances. Naval supply lines enabled Roman armies to operate in regions that couldn't support large forces through local resources, while naval transportation allowed rapid deployment of reinforcements and supplies that gave Rome strategic flexibility that land-based enemies couldn't match. The Roman military's intelligence capabilities, though less documented than other aspects of military organization, apparently included systematic collection and analysis of information about enemy capabilities, political conditions, and geographical factors that influenced strategic planning. Roman commanders consistently demonstrated knowledge of enemy weaknesses and tactical preferences that suggest sophisticated intelligence operations. Roman military engineering extended beyond battlefield applications to include urban planning, public works, and infrastructure development that supported civilian life while serving military objectives. Roman military engineers designed cities, water systems, and transportation networks that improved living conditions for civilian populations while providing strategic advantages for military operations. Let us now explore the sophisticated Roman legal system that provided the foundation for governance throughout the empire and continues to influence legal systems worldwide. Roman law represented one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements and demonstrates the systematic thinking that characterized Roman approaches to complex social problems. The development of Roman law spanned over 1,000 years and reflected the empire's evolution from city-state to world empire. The 12 Tables, established around 450 BCE, provided the foundation for legal development that would eventually encompass civil law, criminal law, commercial law, and administrative law that governed relationships throughout the Roman world. Roman legal principles emphasized written law over arbitrary authority, procedural fairness over social privilege, and rational analysis over traditional customs in ways that created predictable, legal environments that supported economic development and social stability. These principles provided the intellectual framework for legal systems that could adapt to changing conditions while maintaining consistency and legitimacy. The Roman legal profession developed sophisticated approaches to legal education, practice, and theory that created professional competence and ethical standards that influenced legal practice throughout the empire. Roman jurists developed analytical methods and conceptual frameworks that enabled systematic study of legal problems and consistent application of legal principles across diverse social and geographical contexts. Roman commercial law provided the legal infrastructure that supported Mediterranean trade networks and economic development throughout the empire. Contract law, property rights, corporate organization, and dispute resolution mechanisms created business environments that encouraged investment and enterprise, while protecting individual rights and collective interests. Roman family law balanced individual autonomy with social stability in ways that recognized both personal freedom and collective responsibility. Marriage law, inheritance rights, parent-child relationships, and divorce procedures provided legal frameworks that adapted to changing social conditions while maintaining cultural continuity and family stability. Roman criminal law developed systematic approaches to defining crimes, determining guilt, and imposing punishment that balanced individual rights with social protection. Criminal procedure emphasized evidence over accusation, proportional punishment over arbitrary revenge, and rehabilitation over pure retribution in ways that created criminal justice systems that served both individual and collective interests. The Roman legal system's international dimensions enabled governance of diverse populations with different cultural backgrounds, legal traditions, and social structures. Roman law provided common standards and procedures that enabled peaceful resolution of disputes between individuals and groups from different cultural backgrounds, while respecting local customs and practices that didn't conflict with imperial objectives. Roman administrative law created systematic approaches to government organization, official authority, and bureaucratic procedure that enabled effective governance of territories spanning 3 continents. Administrative law defined governmental powers, established procedural requirements, and created accountability mechanisms that prevented arbitrary government action while ensuring effective public administration. The Roman legal system's influence on subsequent legal development extends throughout Western civilization and includes fundamental concepts that continue to shape contemporary legal thinking. Roman contributions to jurisprudence include systematic legal analysis, procedural due process, written legal codes, professional legal education, and international law that remain essential elements of modern legal systems. Roman legal education created systematic approaches to legal study that combined theoretical analysis with practical training in ways that produced legal professionals with both intellectual competence and practical skills. Legal education emphasized critical thinking, systematic analysis, and ethical responsibility that created professional standards and practices that influenced legal education throughout subsequent history. The preservation and transmission of Roman legal knowledge through medieval and Renaissance periods demonstrates the enduring value of Roman legal thinking and its relevance to societies with different political and social structures. Roman legal principles proved adaptable to changing historical conditions while maintaining intellectual coherence and practical utility. Now let us delve deeper into the economic systems that supported Roman imperial expansion and sustained the empire's urban populations. Roman economic organization represented unprecedented integration of agricultural production, manufacturing, trade, and financial services that created prosperity on a scale that wouldn't be matched again until the modern era. Roman agriculture evolved from subsistence farming to commercial production that supplied urban markets throughout the empire. Larger states called latifundia used slave labor and systematic management techniques to produce agricultural surpluses that supported non-agricultural populations while generating profits that could be invested in further economic development. Roman agricultural innovation included crop rotation systems, irrigation techniques, and livestock management practices that increased productivity while maintaining soil fertility. Agricultural manuals by writers like Columella provided systematic approaches to farm management that treated agriculture as a science, requiring careful observation, experimentation, and analysis. The Roman monetary system created standardized currency that facilitated trade throughout the empire while providing government with tools for economic management. Roman coins maintained consistent weights and purity that created confidence in Roman currency, while coin designs served propaganda functions that reinforced imperial authority and cultural unity. Roman banking developed sophisticated financial instruments and services that supported commercial expansion and economic development. Banks provided loans, letters of credit, currency exchange and investment services that enabled merchants to conduct business across vast distances while managing risks associated with long-distance trade. Roman manufacturing created specialized production centers that supplied markets throughout the empire with goods ranging from basic necessities to luxury items. Roman workshops developed production techniques that balanced quality with efficiency, while creating products that met diverse consumer preferences and economic circumstances. Roman trade networks connected regions throughout the empire and beyond, creating economic relationships that influenced political and cultural development. Roman merchants established trading posts, developed commercial relationships, and created distribution systems that brought products from throughout the known world to Roman markets. The economic impact of Roman military spending represented a significant factor in imperial economic development. Military procurement created demand for weapons, equipment, food, and services that stimulated production and provided employment throughout the empire while creating technological innovations that had civilian applications. Roman urban economies developed sophisticated approaches to organizing production, distribution, and consumption in cities that housed hundreds of thousands of inhabitants. Urban markets, workshops, and services created economic environments that supported diverse populations while generating wealth that funded public works and cultural activities. Roman taxation systems provided government revenues while attempting to avoid economic disruption that could reduce productivity or provoke resistance. Tax collection methods, assessment procedures, and payment schedules reflected understanding of economic principles that balance revenue generation with economic development. The Roman economy's integration with imperial administration created systematic approaches to economic policy that coordinated government actions with market forces. Economic regulations, public works spending, and monetary policy demonstrated governmental understanding of economic relationships that influenced prosperity and stability throughout the empire. Roman economic inequality reflected social hierarchies, while providing incentives for economic activity and social mobility. The gap between rich and poor created social tensions, but also generated investment capital and consumer demand that drove economic development and technological innovation. Roman slavery represented both an economic foundation and a moral contradiction that influenced social development throughout imperial history. Slave labor provided essential workforce for agriculture, manufacturing, and domestic service, while creating social relationships that affected all aspects of Roman society. The economic consequences of Roman territorial expansion included both benefits and costs that affected long-term imperial sustainability. Conquest provided resources and markets that supported economic growth, but military expenses and administrative costs also created financial pressures that challenged imperial fiscal management. Roman economic decline during the later imperial period resulted from multiple factors, including military expenses, political instability, tax pressures, and competition from other economic regions. Understanding this economic decline provides insights into the relationship between economic prosperity and political stability that affected imperial survival. Finally, let us examine the religious transformation of the Roman Empire through the rise of Christianity, which represents one of history's most profound cultural changes and demonstrates both the adaptability and limitations of Roman imperial culture. Christianity emerged within the complex religious environment of the early Roman Empire, where traditional Roman gods coexisted with mystery religions, philosophical schools, and local cults from throughout the Mediterranean world. This religious diversity created conditions that enabled new spiritual movements to develop, while providing competition that tested their appeal and sustainability. Early Christian communities developed organizational structures and theological doctrines that addressed spiritual needs while creating social networks that provided support and identity for converts. Christian churches combined religious worship with social services that appealed to urban populations who lacked traditional family and tribal support systems. The Roman government's initial response to Christianity reflected standard approaches to religious innovation that balanced tolerance with security concerns. Roman authorities generally permitted religious diversity while prohibiting activities that threatened public order or imperial authority. Christian persecution, when it occurred, resulted from specific political circumstances rather than systematic religious intolerance. Roman officials typically acted against Christians only when political pressures required demonstrations of loyalty or when Christians refused to participate in civic religious activities that were considered essential for public welfare. The conversion of Constantine represented a turning point that transformed Christianity from a persecuted minority to an imperial religion with governmental support. Constantine's motivations combined personal conviction with political calculation that recognized Christianity's growing influence and organizational capabilities. The Christianization of the Roman Empire created new relationships between religious and political authority that influenced imperial governance while transforming Christian theological and institutional development. Imperial support provided resources and legitimacy for Christian expansion while creating temptations for corruption and political compromise. Christian theological development during the imperial period addressed fundamental questions about divine nature, human salvation, and social relationships that had implications beyond purely religious concerns. Christian thought influenced philosophy, law, ethics, and political theory in ways that shaped subsequent Western intellectual development. The establishment of Christian orthodoxy through imperial councils and theological controversies demonstrated both the benefits and dangers of governmental involvement in religious affairs. Imperial authority could resolve disputes and establish unity, but it could also suppress legitimate theological diversity and create resentment among dissenting groups. Christian social teaching addressed poverty, slavery, family relationships, and civic obligations in ways that both supported and challenged existing Roman social structures. Christian emphasis on human dignity and spiritual equality created tensions with Roman social hierarchies while providing moral foundations for social reform. The rise of Christian monasticism represented alternative approaches to spiritual development that created new forms of religious community while preserving classical learning and culture during periods of political instability. Monastic communities combined religious devotion with practical activities that benefited broader society. Christian art and architecture adapted Roman artistic traditions while developing distinctive styles and themes that expressed Christian theological and spiritual concerns. Christian artistic innovation influenced subsequent cultural development while preserving classical artistic techniques and aesthetic principles. The relationship between Christianity and classical learning created both conflicts and syntheses that influenced educational development throughout the later empire and beyond. Christian scholars developed approaches to classical literature, philosophy, and science that preserved ancient learning while adapting it to Christian purposes. The transformation of Roman imperial culture through Christianity demonstrates both the empire's cultural adaptability and the profound changes that religious innovation could create within established civilizations. The synthesis of Roman and Christian elements created new cultural forms that influenced subsequent European development while maintaining continuity with classical traditions. As we conclude this extended journey through Roman civilization, we can appreciate the extraordinary complexity and sophistication of a society that created institutions, technologies, and cultural achievements that continue to influence our world today. Roman civilization's greatest legacy may be its demonstration that human societies can achieve remarkable things when they combine ambition with organization, diversity with unity, and power with wisdom. The Romans weren't perfect and their empire ultimately fell, but their achievements in law, engineering, administration, military organization, and cultural synthesis created foundations for subsequent civilizations that recognized the enduring value of Roman innovations and adaptations. Sleep peacefully, knowing that the Roman road still lead us toward understanding of human potential and the possibilities that emerge when societies dare to think beyond the limitations of their time and place, creating lasting institutions and cultural achievements that enrich human experience across the centuries. But before we truly rest, there are still more remarkable layers of Roman civilization that deserve our attention, stories that reveal the intricate details of how an empire functioned on the most human level, where individual lives intersected with the grand machinery of imperial administration. let us explore the fascinating world of Roman public baths, the thermae, which represented far more than simple bathing facilities. These enormous complexes served as social centres, business venues, educational institutions, and cultural gathering places that reveal how Romans understood the relationship between physical well-being, social interaction, and civilized life. The baths of Caracalla in Rome, completed around 216 CE, could accommodate over 1,600 bathers simultaneously and employed hundreds of workers who maintained the complex systems that made these facilities possible. The building covered over 50 acres and included not only bathing pools but also libraries, lecture halls, gymnasiums, gardens, shops, and restaurants that created comprehensive environments for leisure and social interaction. The engineering systems that supported Roman baths represented some of the most sophisticated technology in the ancient world. The Hippocust heating system circulated hot air through hollow walls and floors, maintaining precise temperatures in different areas of the complex. The caldarium required temperatures around 40 degrees Celsius, while the tepidarium maintained moderate warmth, and the frigidarium provided cooling pools that completed the bathing sequence. Roman bath attendants included specialized workers who understood the complex social protocols that governed bathing behavior. Capseri guarded bathers' clothing and valuables, Alipli removed unwanted body hair, and unctors applied oils and perfumes according to elaborate rituals that reflected both hygienic practices and social status displays. The social dynamics of Roman baths created opportunities for networking, business dealings, and political conversations that often proved more important than the bathing itself. Senators conducted informal meetings while soaking in warm pools, merchants negotiated deals between massage sessions, and ambitious individuals cultivated relationships that could advance their careers or social standing. Roman bathing culture also reflected complex attitudes toward the human body, privacy, and social hierarchy that differed dramatically from modern sensibilities. Public nudity was completely normal in bath contexts, but social protocols still governed behaviour in ways that maintained dignity and respect for others' comfort and social position. The economic impact of Roman baths extended throughout urban communities and created entire industries devoted to supplying bath complexes with fuel, water, oils, perfumes, towels, and food. Bath-related commerce employed thousands of people and generated significant tax revenues that supported municipal services and public works projects. Women's bathing arrangements varied by location and social class, with some baths providing separate facilities or designated hours for female bathers. Upper-class women often maintained private bathing facilities in their homes, while working-class women used public baths according to schedules that accommodated their domestic and occupational responsibilities. The cultural significance of Roman baths extended beyond their practical functions to embody Roman values about civilization, luxury, and the proper use of leisure time. Romans viewed regular bathing as a mark of civilized behavior that distinguished them from barbarian peoples who supposedly neglected personal hygiene and social refinement. Roman medical theory integrated bathing with health maintenance through concepts that connected physical cleanliness with mental well-being and spiritual balance. Physicians prescribed specific bathing routines for various ailments, viewing the thermal treatments and social interactions as therapeutic interventions that addressed both physical and psychological health concerns. The decline of Roman bath culture during the later imperial period reflected broader economic and social changes that affected urban life throughout the empire. Maintaining large bath complexes required enormous resources and sophisticated infrastructure that became increasingly difficult to sustain as imperial wealth and administrative capacity declined. Now let us examine the remarkable Roman entertainment industry beyond the famous gladiatorial games, exploring the theatrical performances, chariot racing, and musical spectacles that provided recreation for millions of Romans, while creating artistic and cultural innovations that influenced subsequent civilizations. Roman theatre evolved from Greek dramatic traditions, but developed distinctive characteristics that reflected Roman social values and political concerns. Roman playwrights like Plautus and Terence created comedies that addressed contemporary social issues while providing entertainment that appealed to diverse audiences from various social backgrounds. The physical structures of Roman theatres demonstrated sophisticated understanding of acoustics, sightlines, and crowd control that enabled performances for audiences numbering in the thousands. The semicircular seating arrangements, Stage configurations and architectural details were calculated to create optimal viewing and listening conditions while maintaining social hierarchies through seating assignments. Roman theatrical performances included elaborate stage machinery that created special effects rivaling modern productions. Mechanical devices could raise actors into the air to simulate flight, create thunder and lightning effects, and change scenery during performances through systems of pulleys, counterweights, and concealed operators who coordinated complex staging requirements. The economic organization of Roman theatre involved professional companies, wealthy sponsors, and municipal governments that collaborated to finance productions while creating career opportunities for actors, musicians, costume designers, and stage technicians who developed specialized skills and artistic traditions. Roman chariot racing represented perhaps the empire's most popular spectator sport and created the ancient world's first truly mass entertainment industry. The Circus Maximus in Rome could hold over 250,000 spectators and hosted races that generated enormous excitement while providing venues for political demonstration and social expression that influenced imperial policy. Chariot racing teams, identified by colours red, white, blue and green, developed passionate followings that resembled modern sports fandom but with political dimensions that sometimes erupted into riots and civil disturbances. Team loyalties crossed social class boundaries and created shared identities that could unite or divide urban populations depending on racing outcomes and political circumstances. The breeding and training of racing horses represented a sophisticated industry that involved veterinary medicine, nutritional science, and athletic training techniques that anticipated modern approaches to animal sports. Roman horse breeding programs produced animals with speed, endurance, and temperament characteristics optimized for racing performance. Successful charioteers could achieve wealth and fame that elevated them far above their typical social origins. Star drivers like Diocles accumulated fortunes rivaling those of wealthy merchants, while attracting devoted fans who followed their careers with intense personal investment. These racing celebrities influenced fashion, entertainment trends, and popular culture throughout the empire. The economic impact of chariot racing extended throughout Roman society through betting, concessions, tourism, and related industries that generated employment and tax revenues while creating business opportunities for entrepreneurs who supplied racing-related goods and services. Roman musical culture encompassed both intimate domestic performances and large-scale public spectacles that demonstrated the empire's cultural sophistication and diversity. Musical instruments from throughout the empire, lyres from Greece, horns from Gaul, drums from Africa, combined to create distinctive Roman musical styles that influenced subsequent European musical development. Professional musicians in Roman society included both free citizens and skilled slaves, who performed in various contexts ranging from religious ceremonies to private parties to public celebrations. Musical education was considered an essential component of upper-class cultural training, with wealthy Romans expected to demonstrate competence in both performance and appreciation of sophisticated musical works. Roman musical theory, influenced by Greek traditions but adapted to Roman tastes and social requirements, developed systematic approaches to composition, performance, and musical education that created professional standards and artistic traditions. Musical schools trained performers while preserving and transmitting musical knowledge that influenced subsequent musical development. The integration of music with other forms of Roman entertainment created multimedia spectacles that combined dramatic performance, athletic competition, religious ritual, and musical presentation in ways that engaged audiences through multiple sensory experiences. These integrated entertainments established templates for subsequent cultural productions that emphasized comprehensive aesthetic experiences. Let us now delve into the remarkable Roman engineering achievement of aqueduct systems that supplied fresh water to millions of urban inhabitants and enabled the development of cities far larger than any previous civilization had sustained. The Roman aqueduct network represented the ancient world's most sophisticated water supply system and demonstrated engineering capabilities that wouldn't be matched again until the Industrial Revolution. The system included over 400 miles of aqueducts that served the city of Rome alone, delivering over 200 million gallons of fresh water daily to support a population exceeding 1 million inhabitants. Roman aqueduct engineering solved complex technical problems related to surveying, construction, and maintenance that required mathematical precision and practical expertise. The gradual slopes necessary to maintain water flow over dozens of miles demanded surveying accuracy that could maintain consistent grades across varied terrain, while avoiding obstacles and structural failures. The construction techniques used for Roman aqueducts combined stone masonry, concrete work, and precision engineering that produced structures of extraordinary durability. Many Roman aqueducts continue to function today, nearly 2 millennia after their construction, demonstrating the quality of Roman engineering and construction management. Roman water distribution systems within cities included sophisticated networks of pipes, valves, and storage facilities that delivered water to public fountains, private homes, and commercial establishments according to carefully managed allocation systems that balance public needs with private privileges. The social implications of Roman water systems extended far beyond their practical functions to influence urban development patterns, public health, and quality of life in ways that distinguished Roman cities from all previous urban centres. Abundant fresh water enabled population densities and urban amenities that created new forms of civilized living. Roman fountain design combined practical water distribution with artistic expression that created beautiful public spaces while demonstrating municipal wealth and cultural sophistication. Public fountains served as neighbourhood gathering places and social centres that enhanced community life, while providing essential water access for residents without private water connections. The maintenance of Roman aqueduct systems required specialised knowledge and professional organisations that preserved engineering expertise while ensuring system reliability. Aqueduct maintenance crews included engineers, masons, pipe fitters, and administrators who understood the complex technical requirements necessary to maintain water quality and distribution efficiency. Roman water law developed sophisticated legal principles governing water rights, usage priorities, and maintenance responsibilities that balanced individual needs with collective interests. These legal frameworks provided models for subsequent water management systems and influenced legal approaches to natural resource management. The economic impact of Roman water systems included both direct costs for construction and maintenance, and indirect benefits from enhanced urban development, improved public health, and increased economic activity that resulted from reliable water supplies. The investment in water infrastructure generated long-term economic returns that justified the enormous initial expenditures. Roman bathing culture, as we discussed earlier, depended entirely on these sophisticated water systems that enabled the luxury and hygiene standards that Romans considered essential to civilized life. The integration of water supply with bathing facilities, sewage systems, and urban planning created comprehensive approaches to public health and urban management. Now let us explore the fascinating world of Roman education, which created systematic approaches to learning that produced the administrative, military, and cultural leadership necessary to govern a world empire, while preserving and transmitting the knowledge that sustained Roman civilization. Roman education evolved from informal family instruction to sophisticated institutional systems that provided different types of learning for various social classes and career paths. Elementary education focused on basic literacy and numeracy that enabled participation in commercial and administrative activities, while advanced education prepared students for careers in law, politics, military service, or intellectual pursuits. The Roman curriculum balanced practical skills with cultural refinement in ways that prepared students for adult responsibilities while creating shared cultural knowledge that unified the empire's diverse populations. Students studied Latin literature, rhetoric, mathematics, history, and philosophy according to systematic programs that emphasized both intellectual development and character formation. Roman rhetorical education represented the empire's most distinctive educational innovation and created the persuasive communication skills that were essential for success in law, politics, and administration. Rhetorical training included not only speaking techniques but also logical analysis, emotional appeal, and ethical argumentation that prepared students for leadership roles in Roman society. Private tutors, often educated Greeks or freedmen, provided personalized instruction for wealthy Roman families while creating career opportunities for individuals with educational expertise. The tutor-student relationship often extended beyond formal instruction to include mentoring, cultural guidance, and professional networking that influenced students' entire careers. Roman schools, both private and public, developed institutional approaches to education that created systematic curriculum, professional teaching standards, and educational facilities that served urban populations throughout the empire. These schools established educational traditions and methodologies that influenced subsequent educational development. Higher education in Rome included specialized schools for law, medicine, philosophy, and rhetoric that created professional competencies while preserving and advancing knowledge in specialized fields. These institutions attracted students from throughout the empire and created intellectual networks that supported cultural and administrative development. Roman libraries represented systematic approaches to knowledge preservation and access that created intellectual resources for scholars, administrators, and educated citizens throughout the empire. The library system included public facilities, private collections, and institutional libraries that maintained books, documents, and records essential for cultural and administrative continuity. Women's education in Roman society varied significantly by social class and family circumstances, with upper-class women often receiving sophisticated instruction in literature, music, and domestic management, while lower-class women typically learned practical skills through family apprenticeships and informal community networks. The integration of education with career preparation created systematic pathways from childhood learning to adult professional roles that enabled social mobility while maintaining cultural continuity. Educational achievement provided opportunities for advancement that could overcome limitations of birth or social background for individuals with exceptional talent and dedication. Roman educational philosophy emphasized the development of character alongside intellectual achievement through approaches that viewed education as preparation for citizenship and moral responsibility rather than simply professional training. This holistic approach to education influenced subsequent educational theory and practice throughout Western civilization. The preservation of Roman educational traditions during the empire's decline and transformation provided continuity that enabled the transmission of classical knowledge to medieval and Renaissance societies that rediscovered and adapted Roman educational approaches to their own needs and circumstances. Finally, let us examine the complex Roman religious landscape before Christianity's rise, exploring the rich tapestry of gods, goddesses, mystery cults, and philosophical schools that provided spiritual meaning and community identity for millions of Romans throughout the empire's history. Roman traditional religion centered on the worship of gods who protected the state, the family, and individual welfare through elaborate ritual practices that emphasized duty, reciprocity, and community participation. The Roman pantheon included both indigenous Italic deities and borrowed gods from Greece, Egypt, and other conquered territories that were integrated into comprehensive religious systems. Roman religious practices included both public ceremonies that reinforced civic unity and private rituals that addressed personal and family concerns. Public festivals provided opportunities for community celebration, while demonstrating collective devotion to gods who protected Roman interests and prosperity. The Roman priesthood included both hereditary positions that preserved traditional religious knowledge and elected offices that connected religious authority with political leadership. Priests performed sacrifices, interpreted omens, and maintained temples according to elaborate protocols that required extensive training and cultural knowledge. Roman household religion centered on the worship of family gods, who protected domestic welfare, and ancestral spirits who connected living family members with deceased relatives. Household shrines provided focal points for daily prayers and offerings that maintained spiritual relationships essential for family prosperity and continuity. Mystery religions from throughout the empire provided alternative approaches to spiritual development that offered personal salvation and intimate relationships with divine forces. Cults of Mithras, Isis, Dionysus, and other deities attracted Roman followers who sought more emotionally satisfying religious experiences than traditional state religion provided. Roman philosophical schools, including Stoicism, Epicureanism, and Neoplatonism, provided intellectual approaches to life's fundamental questions, while creating communities of like-minded individuals who shared ethical commitments and spiritual practices. These philosophical traditions influenced Roman education, literature, and political theory, while providing personal guidance for individuals seeking meaning and purpose. The Roman calendar integrated religious observances with agricultural cycles and civic activities that created comprehensive frameworks for organizing community life. Religious festivals provided structure for the year while creating opportunities for social interaction, cultural expression, and economic activity that enriched community life throughout the empire. Roman religious tolerance within limits enabled the incorporation of diverse religious traditions that enriched imperial spiritual life while maintaining social cohesion. This religious flexibility allowed local populations to maintain ancestral traditions while participating in imperial religious systems that unified diverse cultural groups. The relationship between Roman religion and politics created complex interactions between spiritual authority and secular power that influenced imperial governance while providing legitimacy for political decisions. Religious ceremonies, omens, and prophecies played important roles in political processes that connected divine will with human authority. Roman religious architecture included temples, shrines, and sacred spaces that demonstrated the empire's wealth and cultural sophistication while providing venues for community worship and religious celebration. These religious buildings influenced subsequent architectural development while preserving artistic and cultural traditions. The transformation of Roman religious life through the rise of Christianity represented one of history's most profound cultural changes and demonstrated both the adaptability and limitations of Roman cultural synthesis. The eventual triumph of Christianity created new relationships between religious and political authority that influenced subsequent European development while transforming classical religious traditions. As we draw near the end of our extended journey through Roman civilization, we can appreciate the extraordinary complexity and sophistication of a society that created institutions, technologies, and cultural achievements that continue to influence our world in countless ways. From the engineering marvels that still function today to the legal principles that govern modern societies, from the military innovations that shaped warfare for centuries to the cultural syntheses that enriched human experience, Roman civilization represents humanity's most sustained and successful attempt to create order, prosperity, and meaning on a truly global scale. The Romans weren't perfect. Their society included slavery, violence, and inequality that we rightly condemn. But their achievements in organization, engineering, law, culture, and administration created foundations for subsequent civilizations that recognize the enduring value of Roman innovations and adaptations. Their greatest lesson may be that human societies can achieve remarkable things when they combine ambition with organization, diversity with unity, practical skill with cultural vision, and the courage to think beyond the limitations of their time and place to create institutions and achievements that serve not just their own generation, but countless generations yet to come. Rest well, knowing that the Roman legacy lives on in the roads that still connect our cities, the laws that still govern our societies, the buildings that still inspire our architects, and the ideals of civic duty and cultural achievement that still challenge us to build something greater than ourselves, something worthy of the human potential that the Romans, despite all their flaws, demonstrated with such remarkable clarity and enduring power. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.